So we're ready for this very interesting event with BioPorto. And today we have a hybrid event. So post-COVID, with a physical presence at BioPorto's nice location and on the web at the same time. Please, those of you who participate via the web, if you don't hear me loud and clear, write in the chat. Today, we have Tony Perret, the CEO of BioPorto, Neil Goldman, the CFO of BioPorto, and the CMO, Chris Bird, with us today. And some practical issues. If you want to post questions for you participating via the web, please write on the lower right side of the screen, and I will forward the questions during the presentations to the three gentlemen. And for you in the audience, when you post a question, I will repeat the question so the people on the web are able to participate in the Q&A. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you, Klaus, and thank you for everybody that showed up here physically, and for the folks that are online. Thank you for joining us. I believe that a number of you are familiar with BioPorto and its history, but we will go through a little bit about BioPorto and where its focus is today. As Klaus indicated, I'm joined by Neil, CFO, and Chris Bird, Dr. Chris Bird, who is our Chief Medical Officer. We'll talk a little bit about our strategy. We'll talk about the status of our clinical trial and our FDA submission. And then we obviously will talk about the preemptive offering that we have today. So I think many know that I just joined the company along with Neil just 4 months ago in mid-November, and we've been very, very busy over the last 4 months, not only in developing the strategy for the company, but also getting ready for this financing round. But I've also had the opportunity to meet with a number of clinicians in the US. I've visited hospitals in Cincinnati, Chicago, New York, and I will tell you that I've learned a lot in those 4 months, and I've learned that acute kidney injury is a killer, probably more so than I ever knew before, and also more so than most of the clinical community understands. In fact, 1 in 5 adults that are hospitalized in the ICU in hospitals develop AKI. 1 in 4 children that are in ICU in hospitals develop AKI, and AKI also, if you have it, increases your chances for mortality by 25%. So it is a bad disease. It's a bad disease state to have. I think, you know, what this company and product was that we can have an impact on that we can really deliver good patient outcome, improve patient outcomes, and economic outcomes. So a little bit on my background, and I'll have Neil and Chris talk a little bit about their backgrounds, but keep it very, very brief. So I've been in the med device diagnostic industry for 25 years. Prior to joining BioPorto, I was with a company called T2 Biosystems, focused on diagnostic for sepsis causing pathogens. Prior to that, I was with another startup called Hemonext, but I spent a good portion of my career, 18 years, with a company called Hemonetics, where I led a couple of different businesses. As well, I was head of business development and mergers and acquisitions. I actually led 13 different acquisitions on Hemonetics' part. In a number of those roles, I have brought new products to the market, specifically to critical care space, which is where BioPorto is targeted today. And so this is not my first rodeo, so to speak, when it comes to bringing new products into critical care. But I haven't seen one that has as much potential, I should say, as NGAL does. Maybe, Neil, you can say a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Tony, and thank you everyone for being here today, both in person as well as online. As Tony said, we both joined BioPorto about 4 months ago. I come from another NASDAQ-listed company, the US, where I was a CFO for 4 years. This is my 5th CFO role. Before that company, which was a life sciences point-of-care diagnostics business, where we launched a number of products through the FDA as well as regulatory agencies around the world. I was the CFO of 2 rather high-growth private equity-sponsored businesses. One of them also served as Chief Operating Officer, responsible for all global manufacturing, in addition to the finance area. I started my career at Ernst & Young, where I spent about a dozen years early on as a CPA with Fortune 500 clients, but spent many years in consulting there. When I left the firm, I was running our strategy practice for high growth companies between Boston and Chicago. And like Tony, what brought me to BioPorto was what I saw the impact that the NGAL test could have on saving lives. And that, first and foremost, is what captured my attention and interest in coming here. Thank you.
Chris?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the time. I've spent some time with you before, but just by reminder and by way of background, I've also been in the industry for just shy of 25 years, mostly in large organizations, but also in the startup space, having successfully started and sold a molecular diagnostics company. And then also for the last number of years at Roche Diagnostics, which is the global leader in diagnostics. I led the medical organization at Roche and launched, developed over 100 products sent through the FDA, and it was had a good amount of success with those products. And I'm excited to do the same with NGAL, and know we can.
All right. Thank you, Chris. So pretty quickly after arriving at the company, we gathered as an executive team. We were charged by our board to gather as an executive team to develop the strategy for the company. Where will the focus for the company be in the upcoming year or two? And so we have spent a lot of time together developing the strategy, but the strategy is simple. And it really is, it's got 3 pillars. One is, to drive NGAL market adoption, eventually in the US, but start to drive market adoption in the rest of the world right now. NGAL is our flagship product. It's the one I believe that has the highest potential for this company. It's the one that, to be frank, every time I talk to a nephrologist or I talk to an intensivist and they know a little bit about NGAL, they want it. They want it cleared. They want it, put it in their portfolio. We need to get it to them. We've had some failed attempts to get it through the FDA, and I'll talk a little bit about what's different this time, but we have to get it across the finish line. Of course, that doesn't mean that we won't continue to have a pipeline of products in development. We just need to be very mindful as to how much focus we put on those products versus NGAL. Just to remind folks, we're a company that's about 30 people. 30 people in a diagnostic company bringing a new product through development and approvals is a very small company. Right. And so to get distracted by a number of different assays, you're just going to spend a long time moving all these things forward in parallel. So we're taking a much more concentrated approach in bringing NGAL to the market. So that's pillar number 1 of our strategy, right? Focus on NGAL, continue to do our development work, but focus on NGAL. and we'll build a pipeline behind it. Pillar number 2 is to strengthen the company to scale and execute. So what does that mean? So that means we need to prep the company for commercializing our product once we get approval. That means investment in our production equipment. That means investment in our quality systems, making sure that our quality systems are FDA audit ready. We don't have an issue where we get approval, we get an FDA audit, and then we have to shut things down. We have to make sure that our systems are very robust. That means financing the company, right, which is what we're doing right now. To make sure that we can get across the finish line and get to that next stage and get ready for our next financing rounds, which Neil talked about, will be different. Highly likely will be different in the future. And then the third pillar that we have is to attract, develop, and retain the best and brightest employees, aligned with our values. We spent a lot of time discussing this and reflected on, probably one of the bigger issues that we've had with the company, which is turnover of personnel. And the fact that we are now a global company. We are located at different places around the world, we need to adopt in order to attract and retain a more work from home policy than we've had in the past, right? So not necessarily having everybody working in one location. One of the issues with having everybody working within one location is that your pool of candidates, when you need to fill a role, it can be very small if you're looking at just one geographic. And one of the things that I've experienced in my last company is sometimes you get better people if you expand the geography that you're looking for those folks and adopt a more of a remote program. But also, making sure that we have the right incentive programs to keep people retained, because that, the knowledge that they bring is very, very important for us being successful. So those are the 3 pillars of our strategy. Somewhat simple, but I think they should be simple if we were to have the focus that we need as a company. So. If you can move to the slide. So let's talk a little bit about our study that we're in. So we're in the 3rd part of a 3-part clinical study. Actually, let me take a step back before we even go there. We need to make this study a success in order to make our submission a success for the FDA. We've had a number of false starts in terms of submitting to the FDA. And one of the things that I have to give credit to the team, Chris and others on the team, is that we went to the FDA and we asked them through 3 separate meetings, what they call pre-submission meetings, exactly what do you need to do, what do you need to see in order to approve this product. And they basically gave us the roadmap. They told us exactly what data that we need to have, what our studies needed to look like. Chris and team went off and designed the studies, went back to them, said, are these good? And they said, yes. And we continue to have that discussion with the FDA as we go through these studies. We also bring in outside eyes to take a look at what we're doing. So we recruited a regulatory person who is necessarily based here out of the Hellerup office. But we've also contracted with outside consultants that know the FDA process to assist us with the development of the package And as we get close to the end, towards the final, we'll bring in another set of consultants that are ex-FDA to take a look at the package, just to make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. So we're following this roadmap. I think the team is doing a great job in terms of executing on the trials. As I alluded to before, we're in the third part now of a 3-part study. The first 2 parts were reference range. What is the healthy range of NGAL that any individual, you or I, would have just sitting here today? Everybody has some level of NGAL in their body. So what's the healthy range? And then what is the cutoff, where if you are over and above this particular value, that could mean you're in trouble, right? That could mean there's something for the clinician to look at. Both those studies, the reference range and the cuff study, are complete. We are now in basically the pivotal clinical trial, where we're actually processing patients to identify AKI in those patients, and basically comparing that data with standard of care serum creatinine levels, as well as burn output and overall health metrics for that patient, to decide whether that patient has AKI or not. And then we're looking at that concordance between the NGAL value and that value, and that's ultimately what we'll submit to the FDA. It's going well. Our enrollment was delayed by COVID. However, it's restarted in a good way. We're very, very confident that we'll finish enrollment, which basically means we'll have collected samples from patients that we need to finish the trial. We'll complete that in the first half of this year. Beyond that, we have to put together put together that package, combine it with the analytical data as well as the technical files in order to submit to the FDA. I will tell you that that's a period of months, not quarters, for us to do that. And then once the FDA has it, it's the calendar starts. It's 150 days that basically the FDA commits to approve it. That being said, they can come back to us with questions. They can come back to us and say, you need more data. Once they do that, the clock stops, right? And we have to respond very quickly. We have to gather more data quickly. We have to do more analysis quickly. So it can take some time, right? So all likelihood, we're going to go into 2023 without an approval. Maybe we'll get the approval, sometime in 2023. Who knows? Who knows? Anything goes when it comes to the FDA. I'm not going to pretend to know, how they're going to prioritize this. We do know that they gave this submission breakthrough status. What breakthrough status means is you get to the front of the line. You get priority when it comes to review. They want to see this pediatric indication on the market, so that's the reason why they gave this breakthrough status. If you can change the slide. So just to remind everybody, NGAL is a big opportunity in itself, right? So we estimate that it's a $3 billion opportunity, which 1.2 billion, will come from the, is in the U.S., and then you get 1.8 that's the rest of the world, right? Just in the NGAL test itself. So this is not a small market that we're chasing. It's very prevalent. This is not AKI is not a rare disease. It's very prevalent. So we see this as a very big opportunity. So Mia, if you can change it again. So we talked a little bit about the submission. I'll let Neil talk a little bit about our future capital market intentions.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. So just as a quick overview, and then I'll walk through the slide that you see on the screen. To begin with, the offering that we have today, the preemptive rights offering, as you know, is to raise about 100 million krona, and it provides each current shareholder with a preemptive right. And if you exchange 4 rights together with 1.50, you get a new share in BioPorto. That's that of that 100.4 million, nearly 75 million is already subscribed in advance, including all 3 of our top 3 shareholders, and or guaranteed by institutional investors. So we're very appreciative of the confidence that those large shareholders are showing in the company and in our entire team. So that's where we stand today. As it relates to this picture, so Tony has essentially walked through the middle bar as it relates to pediatric NGAL. And of course, as you know, time have talked about additional indication, and that's what the bottom bar is talking about, adult and other things that follow from that. What is a bit different in terms of the level of information we're talking about today is the top bar, where we talk about financing. So let me start by being very, very clear. This raise, this 100 million, will take us for another year, and certainly some room beyond that. But what we say is specifically regulatorily, it will take us for 1 year. So then you might say, well, why do you have, and it is intentionally somewhat fuzzy looking from a time point standpoint on the chart, because it is fuzzy, why do we have additional equity raises on there? And the answer is very simple, is to give this company the opportunity to get access to the US capital markets, which will be the largest commercial market for the NGAL test. The funding potential in the US, as we know, is greater in sum total than there is here in Denmark. Now, that's not at all to take away from the incredible, and I, since joining the company, have been blown away by the level of support, patience, confidence that our existing shareholders have seen. And as Tony was talking about at the very beginning of the discussion about the impact that NGAL can have on saving lives, I imagine those of you who are dialed in from your homes or offices may be nodding your heads, but I will tell you, everyone here in the room with us today were nodding their heads, which tells me that you all have the same commitment to the value that NGAL can impact on people and saving lives. So, but as it relates to the financing, the idea is that by getting to the point where we have completed a submission, the opportunity then to go to lower middle market institutional investors in the US, either through a cross-border transaction, as is alluded to here, and or a dual listing and or IPO on NASDAQ in the US, and the specifics of that have not been defined. That's part of what our work is left to do. That provides an opportunity to take the liquidity of the company to a new level, based hopefully on a valuation that reflects the opportunity to do that, from having de-risked the business by having gotten through the submission. And there are certainly institutional investors that will invest in companies at that stage of their cycle in advance of an approval. When will that be? What will that look like? How will that appear? Well, that's our job to go figure out. Will market dynamics, regulatory timing, and other things potentially affect them? Absolutely. We're all experiencing the impact of some terrible things going on in the world on the capital markets today. But I can assure you that we believe that, and with the relationships that Tony and I have had from our past with sell-side analysts, with investment banks in the US, and with institutional investors, that there is an opportunity for BioPorto to expand its capital markets footprint. That's beyond the value that the product can bring to saving lives, is why we're here. And to get us to that point is why we're undertaking this rights offering.
Okay.
So this next slide is really a summary of what I described earlier. as an example, where if you had, for example, a certain number of shares, and then you would combine those with rights along with 150 per share, then you get 4-to-1 or 1-to-4, depending on the way you look at it, ratio of new shares in the offering. So pretty straightforward math. And those rights, the way, by the way, in case anyone's wondering, the way to exercise those rights is by contacting your custodial bank that holds your shares. Just contact them and they'll have their paperwork for you to complete. And then we have a slide here that has a number of the key dates for the rights issue. Don't worry, I will not read through these. Of course, they're all listed in the prospectus. They are listed in the announcement that we put out last Monday. So you can refer to those on the web and on our website. And if you go to our website, www.bioporto.com, and at the top, you just mouse over Investor Relations, and there is a option there to get information and get a copy of the prospectus, as well as other information, including a brochure that is in Danish that talks about the company, a letter from the company, and the offering, along with other materials. And that's really the extent of the slides. We have a summary of the risk offerings that, of course, that are in the prospectus.
Thank you, Neil. So I know there were some questions posted, right? Klaus, or should we answer the questions?
Yes. Thanks a lot, gentlemen. First of all, there's a question from one participant regarding the COVID-19 project. Did you shelve that product, or what are your plans?
We haven't shelved the product. It's still under investigation. I'll be very transparent that the first investigation didn't yield the results that we felt confident in terms of bringing a product to the market. So the discovery team is still working on the COVID project. They are running now a second investigation, and to ensure that we also cover the Omicron variant. Both myself and Neil actually came from companies that sold COVID tests. I will tell you, it's not necessarily an easy market. It's one where if I felt we had a product that we should commercialize, I would seek out a partner to actually get that commercialized. We're a team of 30 people. We're focused on the hour right now, and at this point in time, I don't want to redirect a good portion of those people to work on commercializing a COVID test. We haven't given up on it. We're still working on it. We'll find a partner if we find something that we should commercialize.
Thanks a lot, Tony. Straight answer.
Just one more question from the web, if that's okay with you. Yes, it's one more question regarding NGAL and submission. Before the two gentlemen, the CEO and the CFO, joined the company, the plans were for, I think it was Q3, calendar year Q3 for submission. Is that correct, Chris? What have changed? Is it only the COVID situation, or is there something else?
Chris, answer that.
Yeah, sure. So for the most part, that was with the initial time frame with contracting through a normal process. Contracting through COVID was a nightmare. So as you might imagine, all of the hospitals were focusing on COVID trials and enrolling patients in COVID studies, and then they downgraded all non-COVID studies. That was all built into the original timeframe. Now, with going forward, now we have the sites contracted, of course, months ago, and now they're enrolling. And then we finished the cutoff establishment study, as Tony had mentioned, and then 2/3 of the way through the cutoff validation study. We did experience a hiccup with with enrollment, which happened earlier this year with Omicron. It did result in research coordinators not being allowed on site to enroll. It also infected a lot of the personnel and the staff. So you had limited staff involved in the actual enrollment process, which meant that you just weren't bringing in the patients. Also, a number of the sites had policies against COVID samples being used, so COVID positive samples being used in studies. So the patient population that did fit our inclusion criteria, the samples weren't even allowed to be used on site because of the policies that occurred at the sites. Fortunately, we sort of moved on beyond that now. So dare I say, knock on wood, that we've actually seen a decrease and a decline in Omicron cases in the US. And at the site specifically, policies have eased up. And so now we're seeing the enrollment numbers that we thought we would see in our planning, and in some cases even surpassing some of those numbers. So long story short is that we're now on the track that we thought we would be on before COVID was an issue in enrollment. And based on the enrollment numbers and the projections, that's why Tony mentions that we're pretty confident that we will hit our H1 targets for enrollment.
Thanks a lot, Chris. And then we would like to ask the audience, do you have any questions? You had a question, yeah? Thanks a lot for the question. There's a question from the audience here in the room about NGAL. First of all, the pediatric indication, would that lead to further research and development, and by that further costs, or is this indication only for children, or can you use this indication for adults? And then your first question was about the credibility in relation to the study. Some investors, those who have joined the company for a long time, have experienced similar stories before. Now we have a new management team on board. Of course, it's always benefit of doubt, but I think the management will answer both the questions. Thanks a lot.
So I'll start with the second part of your question first. And so what we're filing with the FDA for this de novo submission is pediatric, but pediatric is greater than 3 months and less than 22 years. So there is a part of that population that is between 18 and 22, well, 21 years old, right? And so with that, we can go into adult hospitals and market that product there with that approval. Also, by getting the pediatric first, which is, to be frank, where the FDA, again, following the FDA instructions, they wanted us to focus first. By getting that first and getting that approval for pediatrics, you set yourself up for the adults. There are a number of things that we don't have to repeat when we go for the adult indication. Then we can file what is called a 510K. And a 510K basically gives you clearance to market based on the fact that a predicate device or predicate diagnostic is already out there, and you're just proving that you're as good as that predicate. So it's a little easier to get that adult indication after. In terms of your first question, I'm not quite sure how to answer that, other than to say that it's an entire different staff, right? It's different people from not only from Neil and myself, but from a regulatory standpoint, from a R&D standpoint, from a and Chris is relatively new as well. So it's a different staff, it's different management. I'm not sure that the FDA provided as much guidance before as they have this time around, and we have the clinical community, behind us in terms of getting this test out. I don't know, Chris. I mean, if you can add to it as well.
Yeah, what I would add to that, and that's a great question. What I would add to this is because of the breakthrough designation status, you can enter into what's called a sprint discussion with the FDA, which is to have a bidirectional dialogue on a narrow topic. And that narrow topic can be the inclusion criteria or the exclusion criteria of the patient population to enroll. Or it can be, what is the exact intended use statement need to be to satisfy and placate the FDA? That has not been done before. So this is the first that has been done. Pre-submissions had occurred before 2 submissions back for an adult population. The last pediatric did not have a pre-submission, so this was a bit more unique that way. And the last one was a retrospective analysis of a study that had already taken place, which was the right move at the time, to be clear. And then I think going forward, and also to add on to what you were saying about the pediatric and adult, sites, they're going to validate the test for the population that they need to validate it for. So having it on label for the pediatric claim gives us the license to sell and market to that population. So we can proactively go to that population. Naturally, when you come on market with a product, hospitals are going to use it in the way that they see fit. So they can validate it for the populations that they see and deem as important, and we can only support them in a reactive way. And then the second half of your second question, will we pursue an adult claim? And the answer is yes, because that will give us the license to sell and market to that unique population.
So just to make sure we put a point on one thing that you were saying there, Chris, so that it's clear for everyone, because of this age range that Tony described, up to, but not including age 22, that we actually have in our clinical trials, I believe 4 sites, correct? 4 of the sites that are adult hospitals. They do not have a pediatric intensive care unit. They are adult ICUs. Now the study is being done just for individuals up through age 21, just shy of their 22nd birthday. But by having that allows, when the time comes, following submission and hopefully following approval, that our salespeople will be able to call on those hospitals, certainly focused on selling only up to that age range. But as Chris was saying, the hospital and the clinicians will decide how they use the test.
Would it be illegal to use it?
No. So clinicians have the right to actually use whatever therapies, whatever devices and diagnostics that they feel is beneficial for the patient.
Yeah, and for those that are on, the question was, would it be illegal to use it that way? And that's an important point. And it's governed under something called CLIA law, C-L-I-A law.
Yeah.
It's called off-label use.
Yeah.
Great question.
Just to sum up, and when you, or if you get approved for pediatric use, the financial side of the story is actually that you are able to get cash flow in the company from that indication, use those money for other products or for the adult product. So that's just to sum up for the audience. In it. Yeah.
We have cash flow associated with NGAL tests today. It is being used as a research use only diagnostic. Just talk about off-label use. Clinicians are using the RUO product off-label to treat patients. So we already have cash flow associated with it. We just need to get it cleared.
And for the audience online, there's a question from the audience here about the IP rights and how are we today? And I think Tony will address that question. Thank you.
And Neil can jump in as well. So what we have, Carson, you're exactly right. There is IP on NGAL. A lot of it is nearing expiration. So there's a couple things. One is we have a head start, right? We're the only ones focused on NGAL today. We have know-how in the company, and it takes time for a diagnostic company to develop a test and release a test. So I think we have, years of a head start. One of the things that we will do here in the near future, and Neil has started this process, is have our outside IP attorneys starting to talk to our developers and our investigators to see if we can generate new fencing IP around the IP that we have.
If I may, I just want to add one other thing related to the earlier question. The earlier question was about the use of the test. And I'll share a very brief story, which I was asked about while talking to a shareholder yesterday morning. At what moment did you just join the company? Well, I'll skip over that, but along the course of that we talked about the fact that when Tony and I were recruited, we didn't know who each other were, which is pretty unusual if you think about it for a company, much less a public company, going so well so far. But in our very first discussion, after we found out who each other were, it was the Monday just before it was announced. And we were comparing notes, as you would imagine two people would. Well, what did you hear during the recruiting process? What did they tell you? And it was all very, very common. But there was one very key thing that Tony shared with me that I think is directly relevant for the question about clinician use of this test currently on a research use only basis in the United States. And that is, if you're a hospital and you're a clinician and there's a test that's only available on a research use only, then the hurdles administratively that the hospital, that the labs, that the administrators need to go through to be able to accept that diagnostic test, to be able to be used inside that hospital on a research use only, are very high. It doesn't just happen. It happens because clinicians demand it. They fight for it, quite literally, and they work it through the process. And what Tony shared with me on that phone call over lunch that day was one of the things that really captivated him when he looked at the market opportunity for NGAL and his due diligence for the company. And that is that today there are 15 hospitals that we have in our clinical sites, and more than that, I believe today, that are, in fact, I know today more than that, won't put a number out there, but more than that, who are using it on a research use only basis, who are buying it from us. That is part of our NGAL revenues that we report. So if you think about it, if and when the time comes, and we're all working hard to make that happen as soon as we possibly can, that the approval occurs, the sales process for those hospitals is arguably easier, faster, smoother, because they've already defined how they're going to use it in their workflow, and they have clinicians that recognize the value and are using it today. And we believe that speaks volumes over the value of the test from a clinical utility standpoint.
Thanks a lot, Neil. Thanks a lot, Tony. Very good questions. There's one more question from the audience here. Yes. And I will post that question also online. Thanks a lot for the question. There's a question about sepsis and the project they're running on Rigshospitalet in Copenhagen. And the three gentlemen will try to address the question. Please.
Thank you, Lars, for the question. So I'd like to be very clear on what this investigation is. So they're utilizing an assay that was developed by BioPorto called for a marker called thrombomodulin, right? Thrombomodulin is a biomarker that is a protein that's released when there's endothelial damage, basically damage on the inside of your arteries and your veins. That can be caused by a number of different things, including sepsis. Could be caused by COVID, could be caused by somebody being put on going through a heart attack. Just a number of things can cause that. So thrombomodulin is not necessarily a marker of sepsis, it's a marker of endothelial damage. And then if you know you have endothelial damage, then you can prescribe the right therapies to address that patient. And the work that Rigs Hospital has done, I think, they put out an interim report and very good results. They need to finalize their investigation on thrombomodulin. But then we have to ask ourselves the question: if this truly is a good assay, and it can be used in conjunction with a drug or therapy to address endothelial damage, how do we go to market with that, right? Do we go to market with a partner? Do we go to market on our own? In any case, for us to take it from this investigational stage to a product stage is going to require some investment on our part. And I'm not saying that we don't want to make the investment. There's a high likelihood that an investment should be made to get this marker out there. Do we find a partner to help us invest and develop this into an assay that gets us that out there? I think thrombomodulin is actually a promising assay.
Any time frame on?
I think I need to find a commercialization partner.
But right now, it is still a discovery project.
Yeah, still a discovery project. That's a good point, Chris.
Yes, thanks a lot, gentlemen. Then there's a question from the online community in relation to R&D. If you could give us, Neil, a split if we assume that NGAL get approved. I know it's a theoretical question. What would the split be, R&D to sales in US? The R&D part compared to sales.
So the question
It's
is
more like a
hypothetical. What percent of sales would we spend on R&D?
Yeah, going forward.
I think that depends on the range of opportunities and additional indications that our scientific advisory boards under Chris's leadership and others would provide us. And those would be business cases we would evaluate, vet, and evaluate as and when the time came. But I think for the person who asked the question probably has some experience and knowledge of, there are certainly ranges that are typical for diagnostic companies within different stages of their life cycle. And it wouldn't surprise me if we would not follow along those similar ranges as and when the time happened.
Any further questions? There's one more question here from the room, please. There's a question from the audience here if the management group is investing in this subscription or not. Please answer the question.
So you beyond the significant amount of time that we put into the business, and we do have warrants associated with the company, but we have been insiders since basically day one, right? So we're basically barred from investing at this point in time. Will I invest at some point in time in the future? There's a high likelihood of that.
There's no law against investing when there's a prospectus, because at that time, the prospectus is
Yeah.
Yes, I'll reiterate Tony's answer, but you can rest assured that the board, who, by the way, all the board members who are shareholders are among the advanced subscribers and are part of that nearly 75% advanced subscription that includes board members. And that from the board's view, as well as our view philosophically, that being 100% aligned with our shareholders growth opportunities is exactly the way we view the world. And that's what we've done throughout our entire careers.
Thanks a lot, gentlemen. Then there's a question here, and I will address that question. Thanks a lot. So if you and when you get the approval for pediatric use, how much can you reuse of that indication or that approval, and how fast are you able to advance into the adult submission and approval? Is that right?
Yeah,
based on exactly. And you asked the question, Chris. Yeah, thanks a lot.
A lot of the technical file can be reused. So there are approximately 17 technical studies that have to be performed for a submission. And of those, many of them, the majority of them can be repurposed for the adult submission. Those are the technical or analytical studies. On the clinical studies, because you are using a unique population now, so this would be the 22 and above population, there will be, similar to pediatric, there will be 3 studies. A reference range, where you have to, Tony had mentioned, you have to establish the reference range for that population. That's already been completed. So that was done simultaneously for the as we did for the pediatrics. And then the adults, then we will have a population just like we did with the pediatrics, where you have to set the cut point and then validate it. The difference is there are many more ICUs in the United States than there are PICUs, pediatric ICUs. The population is much easier, and it's a whole lot easier for an adult to consent than a child. Getting consent for a child is very difficult. And then on the regulatory front, as Tony had also mentioned, this would be for assuming that we have a same intended use statement, which is risk stratification of stage 2-3 AKIs. You would have a 510K traditional submission pathway versus a de novo. A traditional pathway is much quicker, and a de novo is much more complex and laborious.
That's what this is.
Our current one is a de novo because we're establishing a new clinical use that the market has no indication for currently. So correct.
Gentleman asking before about research and development to sales, because he posted the question again. I'm sorry about that, but as I understood it, you have 50 commercial accounts in US today. Is that right, Tony?
Specific. We haven't put specific numbers out for competitive
Put a
reasons.
number here, 50.
In relation to that number, whatever it is,
if you get, and when you get the approval, how much will that increase? Can you elaborate on that, or is it too early?
No, I think it's too early to say, right? I mean, right now, we're not marketing anything, right? We can't market for off-label use. We can only market for research use. We assume that those customers will remain our customers, obviously, and then we'll market. How many? There are 5,000 hospitals in the U.S. that we're going to go after. How many, can we tackle and convert? The variables are, our team, right? How fast can we build our team to go access those 5,000 hospitals? The variables are the clinical education, right? So we're not only educating on NGAL, but also educating on AKI and how prevalent AKI is, right? So we have to build a clinical team to go help educate. If we lean into that heavy, we can get market share faster, right? But that's going to require a higher level of investment. So it's really hard to put an answer to that question.
I understand.
Yeah.
We got one more there. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the question. So in relation to NGAL and the kidneys, what can you gain of time in relation to the test? And Chris will answer. Sorry? And what treatment? Yeah, sorry. Chris will address that question. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, so it's a very relevant question, and I'll talk to this in terms of the specific claim that we're pursuing, which is risk stratification, because your question could be answered differently depending on the claim itself. If the claim were for post-cardiac surgery, you'd have a different topic. But for risk stratification, which is what our claim is, it will do one of 3 things. So the clinician finds out earlier. And it's a great point you raised, because the kinetics, which means how much NGAL is released upon injury. And it's not the initial injury. It's actually once the threshold of injury occurs, because this is a silent killer. You can have a lot of your kidney scarring and no longer functioning before it's even detected. But then it gets to a threshold level where then it causes an injury, an AKI. And in that case, it can be detected with NGAL. So NGAL raises quickly, and it tells the clinician they can do one of 3 things in this risk stratification model. It's first of all, resource management. If I'm here managing 50 patients in my ICU, which ones do I need to not worry about for AKI? Okay, so that's the first thing. Then I'm using the numbers that were shared earlier. I'm going to take, these 40 of 50 patients that I don't even have to worry about for AKI, for other things, of course, but not for AKI. The second thing is fluid management. Which of them need to be diuresed? So take the fluid off, or maybe potentially if the fluid doesn't work, it's renal replacement therapy, dialysis. And then the third thing is then nephrotoxic exposure. So most patients have comorbidities, which means that they're sick with other things, and they're taking medications to treat those conditions. So those treatments, those medicines in many cases, can cause complications to your kidney. So the clinician knows to adjust the meds, either up titrate or down titrate the dosage, or they can also switch the class of medication completely so that they're not killing their kidneys. So those are the three things: resource management, fluid management, and in this case, it's nephrotoxic exposure management.
Any more questions from the room? There's one more question. Yes, you're welcome. Yes, good question. There's a question about supply chains and to secure supply chains.
This is a question that every company deals with, no matter what they're making. How do you secure your supply chain? And the answer is the same, whether it's a company making an NGAL test or a company making plastic bottles, except the one making plastic bottles probably has more choices for whom they can source their components from than we can. So the answer just becomes even more and more important. And that is management of the relationships, communication with our supply base, helping them understand. And I will just say, in the same manner in which we're talking with you about where are we, what are we doing, what are we planning, how do we collaborate, how do we help ensure that they are being able to be proactive with our needs and working along with us rather than being reactive to avoid surprises, so that to the degree there are raw materials that you can have at different stages of production, that those are available there, so that our technical teams and our quality teams are collaborating together, because things do happen. The question is, do you have the relationships and the processes in place? And that's why Tony talked at the very, very beginning about investments in quality management systems, so that when things happen, you have the trusting relationships in place so that you can deal with them and hopefully not have an impact on the overall business's supply chain. So I guess the same things as you would in any business, but with maybe a particular focus, because as you pointed out, we have dedicated suppliers, as most companies do in the diagnostic space. Very perceptive question. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Any further questions? No questions from the online either. With that said, I would like to thank all the participants from both this room and the online room, and for a great presentation from the three gentlemen to take this BioPorto further on. And thanks a lot, Tim, for hosting us. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
Right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.